Mushroom in the Sky, a student project by Jose Sandoval. I began by making this menu very relaxing because I wanted to set the tone for the game immediately as something a little more whimsical and easygoing than the sort of the hardcore epic action adventure shmups we probably would be expecting. I wanted to go for a more simple style, something that just says, "Hey, this is fun. This is a little goofy. It's a little silly." I wanted to keep this easygoing tone with like some calm sound effects, the birds, and this little fun little section here at the start. This sets the tone for the game. As for the music, I picked it with the same idea in mind. I didn't want something too serious. All the assets I chose, the sound effects, they're all meant to convey the same idea of this being just a fun little experience, not to be taken too seriously, but to show off the different effects. The initials here, I made these enemies start spawning at the side because I wanted to provide a closed environment for the player to just get started with this. Now I made this in the prototype and did not really expand upon it for the actual game because I figured if it works the way as it is, it's just fine the way it is. When this next wave starts, I began experimenting with different wave designs and patterns, reusing some old assets, but keeping it fairly straightforward so that players wouldn't be too frustrated by a lot of different mechanics all at once. I also included a score-based power-up, so when you pass a certain threshold for the score, you gain the triple bullets. I also included these big enemies that when shot at, they'll explode and actually damage the other enemies. When the next wave starts, also triggered by the score, you get a bit more difficulty. You get enemies that will leave these big gray orbs in the way, which will deny you area and incentivize you to use the dash button, which will leave you invincible to damage for a certain amount of time. With all the bullets and the orbs around the area, it really pushes you to use as much space as you can. Now, I understand that having a shmup be in this horizontal setting is very difficult, which is why I included this fast-paced dash to it. Now, once again triggered by score, once you pass 1200, you trigger the second boss. This one will have aiming bullets, and the addition of these old enemies to keep things a little more interesting. Because when they were just the enemy attacks, it felt a little too simple, a little too easy, and there was not much challenge. So, I keep things familiar, but I make them a little fresh. I add new enemies and I keep the old enemies. Once this is defeated, or once it passes a certain part of its health, it's a bit more attacks, and the attacks go a little faster. But I think I may have defeated it too quickly to show it off properly. Once the boss is defeated, you get access to a new power-up. This shield will actually trigger the next spawn wave, so until you grab it, you can stay here forever. But once you grab it, on the bottom right of the UI, you'll see the icon light up. You now have a shield. The X button, it triggers for a certain amount of time, and then after a few seconds, it comes back. So you can't spam the shield to block off the enemies. These new enemies that show up are just meant to focus the player on being careful with their movements, switching from very high, intense, zooming all around the map to a more careful and considerate choice of your movement. The enemies shooting the circle bullets in the middle, combined with the arrows on the right and left sides, both aim towards the same purpose. Now, this score threshold is set up differently from the previous one because I found during my testing that initially when you passed a fixed number, the boss would spawn. But for this one, I found that the fixed number method did not work because the points you would get varied a lot between runs. So instead, I just set the score when the spawn began, and then added 4,000 to that, and then once you pass that new number, the boss will appear. These bosses are a set of 3. These 2 minions on top will start off together, and the boss herself will be invulnerable. Now, these 2 enemies will start attacking together, but once one is defeated, the next one, the other one, will slip to the middle and begin a new attack pattern. It's meant to be a little more difficult, a bit faster. also meant to keep players moving. You can't just stay still in these boss fights, because if you do, the different angles will just end up finding you. Once this boss is defeated, the minion is defeated, the last phase will trigger. So the final boss will move up to the center and begin her own onslaught. It begins with an enemy targeting you and accelerating as it goes through, and if it gets to touch you, it explodes and deals a lot of damage. 3 damage, in fact, that was a lot. At the same time, you'll also get exploding mushrooms showing up in the sides. The reason I chose mushrooms for this is because I wanted to create an interesting parallel between the actual player character, which is a mushroom, and the final boss, which is also a mushroom. So a lot of mushrooms all around, because I wanted to show off this. Even though it is just a silly little game, I really wanted to have a bit of parallel and symbolism added to it. So the mushroom is escaping to like the sky, but it's being stopped by other mushrooms. We're breaking from its mold. With the exploding mushrooms appearing randomly, and the boss defeated, the guardians are defeated, and you can go forth to the sky. Because there's no second level, only options are to go again, or to leave the game. For now, we'll leave the game. Thank you for watching.